This Talking Flutes podcast is kindly sponsored by Trevor James Flutes, making life sound beautiful. You can show them some flute love by following them on Instagram at TJ Flutes, Trevor James Flutes on Facebook, and at trevorjamesflutes.com. Hello and welcome to Talking Flutes Extra with me, Jean-Paul Wright. As the memories of our Northern Hemisphere summer fades into the distance, I'd like to reinvigorate you today with a beautiful flute player and genuinely nice guy who I first had the privilege of meeting many years ago in London. Irish flutist, flute player, flautist, whatever you'd like to call a flute player, Niall O'Riordan enjoys an international career as a soloist and teacher. He performs regularly around the world, well, we could, when we weren't in COVID that is, with pianist Anne Marshall, and they are a beautiful duo together. He's an experienced and passionate teacher and a certified Feldenkrais Method practitioner and uses the method to help musicians reach their potential by learning about their functioning and how to act efficiently. Now, this is really important, and we're going to explore this later. He has taught Feldenkrais classes at the famous Galway International Flute Festival and has published 2 Feldenkrais audio learning programs for flutists. And again, we'll chat about that later. He is recognised for his completely holistic approach to flute playing and teaching, drawing inspiration from psychology, NLP, which is Neuro-Linguistic Programming, yoga, metaphysics, and visualisation. Welcome, Niall, to the Talking Flutes Extra podcast this week. Hi.
Hey, JP. Really good to be here, and thanks for having me on.
Well, as I said to you, I didn't think you realised, but I think you were number 3 or 4 of the original podcast when we started it. And we're on 170, this will be probably 180 when it goes out.
That was a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, you haven't changed. I've got a hell of a lot more lines and bags under the eyes than you.
I have a few, definitely.
So before we get into the juicy bits of talking about your passion for the holistic approach to flute playing, when did you become interested in the flute, and what was the driver behind you making a career out of it?
Well, I went to a really great primary school in Ireland, and the teacher there, his name was Mr. Clifford. If any of my friends are listening who were in my class, he's a really fantastic teacher who had a school band. And this band was like 200 pieces of like young kids all playing different instruments. And so part of our education was everyone in the school plays an instrument. So we start in tin whistles and you kind of go on. I could tell you loads of funny stories about it. We had like special, it was so kind of, I suppose the school was held in such high esteem for its music. Like we had a special uniform just for the night of the Corella, which was where we played in the city hall, and all the other schools, it's kind of like a showcase. But, you know, you'd have other schools kind of, you know, they'd have maybe, 5 people doing a bit of drama or a bit of music. And then it's like, our school was called Scoileasagáin. And there's like, we had a certain tune and we all marched on stage, like 200 of us in lines, and then everyone turning at the same time. So yeah, that was the start of it really. And I played the tin whistle. Funny enough, I started the tin whistle and I realised on the night of one of the first performances that I had my hands around the wrong way compared to everyone else. And I was on stage going, oh my God, I'm doing it all wrong. And nobody picked up on it until then, but I was able to kind of play away. So that got me started. And then there was a guy, the first time I saw the flute, there was a guy in a much older year than me played, like in Ireland, we called, the flute that I play now, the concert flute, because we called tin whistles flutes as well. Yeah, and I saw him playing that, and there was one day I was in my to band. I was like, oh, what's that? And he was like, oh, I go and play in the Butter Exchange band. It was a brass and reed band, and my dad went and inquired about it. And anyway, to make a long story short, I started playing the trumpet. Loved it. This was a marching band, and we basically, all the lessons are provided for free. anyone can come and turn up and learn an instrument. And they're still going, I think. I don't know how they've kind of managed through the years. They had a huge sense of pride about accepting money from the government. They always wanted to be self-sufficient. And I think some of the other bands who did similar things kind of excelled because, you know, they took kind of donations from the government and stuff. And anyway, like my brother started playing clarinet, and my dad actually, I think there was one day I borrowed a flute head joint, took it home, sellotaped it to my brother's clarinet thing, and I was playing it. My dad was like, "Do you just want me to speak to the flute teacher?" So I was like, yeah, okay. And my parents were great. They supported whatever I wanted to do, especially with music. So I just started playing the flute, and I just progressed really, really, really quickly. The teacher was Veronica Lynch, and eventually I started taking lessons with her husband, who was in the army band, Mick Lynch. He was a clarinet player, but very, very good musician. And so I suppose that's kind of the early stages. I was too old to get accepted into the Cork School of Music, and my dad went down every Friday and pestered them, just literally, like, they were like, no, he's too old. And he was like, is there any way we can get him in, basically? And he annoyed them so much, they gave me a place in the flute choir, and there was a flute technique class taught by Evelyn Grant in the Cork School of Music. And then I got to know Evelyn, and he pestered Evelyn. He would go and wait after the class, and he was like, oh, how's he getting on? You know, and Evelyn was like, well, we'll pull a few strings, we'll get him. She was like, I'd like to teach him next year. We'll find a way. So then I started learning with Evelyn, and she was like a really, really good teacher. There was a lot, because I progressed so quickly, I had a lot of really bad habits. I don't think my tone was great at all back then. And yeah, so, and then I kind of went through the School of Music. I got scholarships through the rest of my kind of education there, and then went on and did my degree with the same teacher, Evelyn Grant. But I suppose actually, like, kind of what kept me going the whole time was, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about this at some point, was along the time when I was in the band and having lessons with Veronica, I was just fascinated with James Galway. You know, it's like I had an album. It's funny, sometimes I had one album where he plays it's a Telemann duo with oboe. There's the Bach E major, and there's something else on it. But actually, I listen to it every night going to bed. So I always kind of had that kind of sound and that sense of musicality in my ear. And it's even funny, like sometimes I'll hear, like my dad would buy records every Friday. He'd go into one of the secondhand shops, and the guy in there would keep any flute records that came in for me. So he would go in and just go, you know, do you have anything for my son? So my dad every Friday would come home with some kind of record. But it's funny because now anytime I listen to some of these recordings, some of the records had kind of skips in them. And when I listen to, say, showpieces, James Galway's showpieces, it'll come to a point where I'm like, oh, that's where the skip was in my record, you know, and just so yeah, that's what got me into it, you know. And then, you know, through the rest of my kind of learning in the School of Music and all of that, he was the main kind of source of inspiration, really. So in some ways you could say I'm playing the flute also kind of because of him. And, you know, when I heard how the flute can sound, you know, that really inspired me.
You were also awarded the Rising Star on one of the early courses, Jimmy's courses in Switzerland, weren't you?
Yeah. That was funny. Like the first year I went on that course, I cried every day on the phone to my partner Val, because everybody, like, this is going back maybe 11 years or so. I mean, everybody was so good. And I kind of, it was a strange kind of time in my life, really, because, like, I know you through, at the time I worked in All Flutes Plus.
Yes.
And I loved working there, but I knew I needed to be playing, and I knew I needed to be teaching. So I went through a period of time of going, okay, I really want to get my playing in shape. And a few of my other friends were like, oh, you should go to Switzerland. So I spent a year, practicing my scales ridiculously. I mean, every day, hours and hours and hours of scales. And my playing improved loads. And then I went to Switzerland, and if I'm really honest, and I think it's good to be honest about these things, I think I had a bit of an ego. I think I kind of was like, oh, I'm going to really kind of show him how good I am. And I got there, and I was like, oh my God, no. Like, okay, I play well, but all of these other people, fantastic players. So, and I always kind of maintain with that course, and this is only my opinion, I'll often notice, the people who come back the second year, they'll benefit the most from it. So you'll either go and it'll damage your ego because there'll always be somebody better than you. In that kind of context, you'll have a 13-year-old playing Rodrigo or something, like there's always going to be something to make you go, oh, wow, And I always kind of notice this, the people who come back for the second and third years, who kind of, it might be a little destabilizing the first year to hear how good everyone is. But then, like, I remember the second, and, he was amazing with the lessons, like the lessons I had then, he told me exactly what I needed to do. But what was really encouraging, the following year I did go back, and the first comment he said, he was like, wow, you've been really working at this, haven't you? Because I just did everything he said. And the fact that he heard, he was like, oh, you've been really, really working on this. And, I kept doing it. And then it was in 2014, I was awarded a Rising Star, which is a real honor, It's like it goes from, this kind of, young boy in Cork City, kind of listening to records of your hero to, having lessons with him, but then him also acknowledging you as, a rising star or somebody to be commended on the course. And what was great about that actually as well was I was given or awarded a 14 karat gold Nargahara head joint, which is fantastic. That's like what I play on at the moment now. So, yeah.
And then to be invited back to teach. And, that from Sir James is the ultimate honour, not only as a person, but as a musician. And, yeah, you can get wonderful musicians, but he wouldn't necessarily invite wonderful musicians back to teach. You've got to have his respect as a human being.
Yeah, I think I do. Like he cares so much about everyone that he teaches, really, and particularly the people who've been going for a long, like I've been part of this course for, I've been part of this course for kind of 10 years or so, or probably longer, maybe 11. So yeah, it's a real honor, and I've kind of taken his teaching, the way he plays the flute, and kind of, made it fit me, and kind of, I suppose in my teaching, there's always, you can't kind of ignore what you kind of learn from your teacher, but then you kind of also develop it and adapt it. And so for me, the Feldenkrais method, for instance, has really helped me kind of solidify some of the kind of things I've learned, say maybe with Sir James, and I might actually explain it in a different way from a Feldenkrais perspective, maybe if it's something to do with breathing or something to do with hand positions, or, a lot of people get kind of discomfort in shoulders or whatever. So, yeah.
So let's move on to Feldenkrais. It was a natural segue that you just introduced there. And for our listeners who may not know what this method is, can you explain its application?
Yeah, I can. Feldenkrais is a difficult thing to describe. It's like I always say to people, it's like trying to describe to somebody what chocolate tastes like. In order to you can describe it, but actually for Feldenkrais, really, you need to do a lesson or really experience it. Like Feldenkrais, he was an engineer and he was a physicist. He was born in 1904 and he died in 1984. And he was very interested in human potential. I think one of the things that kind of led him to his body of work was, just like a lot of people in who work in these fields, he injured himself. He injured his knee playing soccer, and he There was operations or surgery on the cards, and then he started applying his his knowledge of engineering, and you can definitely look at the human structure from a movement point of view, from an engineering point of view. And so he managed to heal his knee. He never never had surgery, as far as I'm aware. And he started to develop. He got interested in judo and self-defense. One of his very early books was on self-defense, actually. And even in that, you can see, if you think of self-defense, really, what is it? Or, in some of these martial arts, it's about acting with efficiency and how being able to use yourselves maybe in self-defense to maybe disarm the person who's, attacking you or whatever like that. And very much in the martial arts, you might know yourself, is that often, it's better not, rather than kind of fighting with what the person is kind of coming towards you with, is you kind of take it, mold it, and turn it against them, kind of, so to speak. You blend with what they're doing already. And so then he got very, very into judo. He was the first person to, Professor Kano, I think, wanted to open a judo dojo in Paris, and Feldenkrais was one of the first people to bring kind of judo to the West. So but I think what happened to him then was he started to think that this work, particularly the floor work in judo, how much it's part of kind of mature human learning. The method is about learning, but learning to act efficiently. We don't really, when we learn to move, we learn kind of organically. In our early years, it's trial and experiment. And very often, then the ways we learn how to move, let's just keep it in the movement context, although movement and thinking, they're all so connected. There's a point then where we kind of develop habits of movement in the world that could be really helpful for us. But actually, I suppose his method is you could maybe say more mature learning as we go back and revisit. So a lot of his method involves movements that you might recognize from kind of child development. So we kind of go back and kind of examine our movement patterns, and through either working with a practitioner who will move the student with their hands, or in a group class, you just move yourself. And by the act of being led through a guided kind of lesson, you encounter difficulties where it's left up to you to, how do I figure this out, And through that, there's a very kind of deep learning about how we move takes place. And that's very different from saying, I don't know, I'm just trying to think, when you take your arm above your head, it might be more useful to take it through the midline, through the direction of your nose or something like that. That's fine, that's a theory, but maybe doing a lesson that really illustrates that you go, wow, it's not something that you've been told, it's something you've experienced, and you go, wow, that actually does make sense to move like that. So how can it benefit? The method itself is for everybody. We all can kind of continue to learn how to kind of act efficiently in the world. And by act, I mean just our movement habits. A lot of us move in ways that actually cause us pain and discomfort. Some of our movement habits, some people could even argue all of our movement habits are also, interconnected with our emotional states, which is again kind of reflective of how we kind of interact with the world. Anybody can really, really benefit from the method. From a musician's point of view, there's a number of levels of why it might be effective for a musician. One is the very simple thing that musicians get injured all the time. The reason musicians get injured, we could say, is that they're moving or doing things in an unconscious way, in a way that they don't realize they're even doing it, that's causing them pain. And the method itself helps students to identify their movement habits and find alternatives. So notice what's causing you the pain or the discomfort. And it could be, for flute, we're talking about flute players here. So, it could be the way a flute player might have their shoulders organized over their chest. Like a very common thing is for somebody to pull back the right shoulder quite a lot. And then there's a big kind of turn in the neck. So it's great for injury. And actually, a lot of people come to the method through having some kind of injury. But actually, in some ways, that's only the tip of the iceberg of what it can offer. Because we can always act more efficiently and more economically with what we're doing playing the instrument. So we start learning about kind of developing our own sensitivities to our own bodies, and then kind of learning about whatever you want to do in the music. What's the most efficient way of doing this, and what way shall I breathe? What do I need to be doing with my fingers? For instance, this comes back to kind of Sir James quite a lot. He always talks about like not hitting the keys. Like you don't have to take your fingers really, really high above the keys. It can be really helpful for people who experience some kind of stage anxiety or performance anxiety. I think the flip side of that, I think, is always to look at it. You'll know this from the NLP, which is kind of reframing it, really moving towards confidence rather than away from anxiety, which is helpful. But another part of the method that I think I'm getting much more interested in at the moment, because it's quite fascinating, is how, first of all, the method is taught through working with the person's nervous system. So it's a method on learning to learn, and there's some principles in how we kind of use how we approach lessons. But the main thing really is, and we chatted about this earlier about neuroplasticity. Like, first of all, Feldenkrais, the idea that the brain is plastic and it can adapt much later into life than we originally thought. And, there's all of these studies of the brain, people with severe injuries in the brain taking over, they may have had a brain injury or something like that, and other parts of the brain taking over function of bodily, like areas of that kind of control movement and stuff like that. So the Feldenkrais method itself is, it's a method of learning to learn. So in a lesson, it really is working with your own nervous system, how your own brain and nervous system organizes your movements. And there's some kind of fascinating kind of strategies that really work that I employ. We can talk about it later if you like, about like how to practice efficiently. It's the Feldenkrais lesson teaches you really the approach to yourself, teaches you how to approach yourself in the practice room as well. We're working with the nervous system. A very simplified way of kind of looking at the human nervous system is we have the sympathetic part of the nervous system and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic is kind of responsible for fight or flight, and that's when we get a lot of adrenaline, and it's actually really kind of helpful. If there's a flood of adrenaline in the system, that's when it can become a little bit problematic. And the method, generally, most of the time, most lessons help us. We need to be able to navigate between both parts of the nervous system. So most lessons bring us into more of a parasympathetic state. So it's very good for helping people who deal with anxiety and kind of issues around that as well. So it's probably, I don't know, does that answer your questions about the method?
Oh, absolutely, Niall. But I remember, and it's going back a long, long time. You were doing a class in West London, and there was a woman that was playing for you, and she was playing, and you went and just sort of changed very gently changed her shoulders and the way she was standing. And I could hear the difference in her tone just by you very gently doing something to her head or neck. I can't remember what it was, but you completely changed how she played, just very, 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 very gently.
Yeah. And funny enough, this gets into very, I would say that I didn't do that. My hands gave her awareness of what she was doing, and her nervous system, her brain then was like, oh, hang on a second. Like so the method is about one part of the teaching, the group classes is called awareness through movement, but the method is about developing awareness. So I don't remember the situation, but I will guess that me seeing this person play, and it's I use this an awful lot in my teaching, like hands-on work. I probably saw, oh, they're doing something with their shoulder girdle, they're doing something with their back that isn't helpful. And you do develop a kind of a sixth sense. I think it's by you work so much with people physically that when you see somebody playing, you kind of go, I know what's going on there for them. There's something to do with the chest or the shoulders. And my hands in that situation, then I'm having a conversation with her, with her nervous system going, hey, do you know you're doing that? And then her brain will go, oh, I didn't know I'm doing that. I'm going to stop doing that. And then when she stops doing that or whatever, something can kind of change in sound.
But I tell people about this story. I've told them loads and loads of times over the years, because the sound was sort of radically different. She'd been she was an older student. She'd been practicing and she didn't notice any negativity in her playing. And then suddenly you, as you say, whatever you were doing, you're guiding her or getting her aware of what she was doing and how she had to change. This sound came out and I saw her face light up as if, wow. But you didn't stop her playing. You just let her carry on playing. And it was though she was just enjoying the moment.
Yeah, it happens a lot. If I'm honest, doing this kind of work or working holistically with a person. And, holistically, like I know you're very, into the holistic side of things with NLP and meditation and stuff like that. But I kind of find over the years teaching that particularly I have my own tricks, I kind of call them in a masterclass. My first principle when I'm teaching people is most people need permission. Well, no, not that they need, but if you want to help somebody improve, very often students just need permission to play well. They the old way of teaching has very much been focusing on what's wrong, and I think there's value in that. But particularly in a masterclass situation, normally a person has prepared enough of the piece to have all these components together. You want to get them to the next level, and I use loads of principles from NLP when I teach. Like, I'm not a trained practitioner, but that doesn't stop me using things like, timeline things. You say to someone, okay, you're playing like this right now. Where in the room would be in 5 years' time? And you walk them to 5 years' time, and you talk them into what's happening in their life. You get them to play. And I always use the word, can you demonstrate how you play now? And they'd play 10 times better after 5 years of practice. But I'm like, hang on a second, this is still you playing. It's just, we're using a tool to help you just uncover something that's always within you. And I find all of these things, like the Feldenkrais Method helps us access this potential we have. NLP, there's lots of things. In my early days, what started me interested in all of this was yoga. And I still have a yoga and a meditation practice. And we were kind of talking, maybe just me, but I kind of remember going back around 18 years ago in London, there was very little of this holistic ways of kind of approaching music making. And I remember I did a workshop at one of the BFS conventions, probably around maybe 16, 17 years ago. And I called it Flute Yoga. And it was very simple. It was, and listeners can try this out, playing the flute in yoga postures. So those of you I had more to it than that. I kind of did things with how resonances can be kind of found in the body and stuff like that. But the main principle was on the listeners who practice yoga, like try playing your flute in warrior posture, or try playing your flute in or try playing your flute in tree, which would be just standing on one leg, if you think Jethro Tull kind of thing. But it does, like, what you're doing there is you're giving the nervous system sensory information, and because of this new, when we become very habitual, we become very habitual in the way we stand, the way we're holding the instrument, and the nervous system isn't really being invited to kind of wake up and maybe pay attention and kind of learn. And suddenly, if you throw something unusual in the mix, like getting a student to stand on one leg, getting people to stand. A good one is awkward pose, Utkatasana, down, so you're kind of almost in a squat. It changes. And the interesting thing I find is there's a quality that comes in when you do these things, whether it's this timeline thing with NLP or some of those things, yoga postures, or using something Feldenkrais related. When the student kind of plays, there is a similar quality becomes present in the sound that's universal for everyone. Now, I'm not saying that the sound is the same for everyone, it's not, but there's a portion of the sound, or there's a core to the sound that I kind of go, oh, here we are, we got it again. This is the same. I know what this is, and it's, if people are trying it out at home, you'll see yourself, there's a resonance that comes into the sound when you stand in a certain yoga posture and play. And I find that fascinating, that actually, you can do a few simple tricks. And the thing is once you experience it, you have a tool to go back to doing it again. So, yeah.
You mentioned efficiency of practice. Now, that's an interesting one, because I very much doubt whether many people actually practice efficiently. And I talk about efficiently in not only what we practice, how we think about our practice, but also our body positioning when we're practicing.
Yeah. I'm big, like I'm doing lots of teaching online. And the beauty of teaching online is sometimes I use my lessons with people and I call them I'm like, let's just do some guided practice. So if you think, and I think there's room for this, and like I offer this for students if it's something that they want. Like if you think, traditionally we have flute lessons, but we never hear how to practice. You never hear your teacher practicing for an hour. So you don't know really what the whole thing feels like. And I've been kind of lucky because in the kind of years going to Switzerland with Sir James, and also because of the internet as well, basically you get to hear him practice all the time. So anytime in between a student, if there's 5 minutes, he's practicing moi sonorite or his scales. But there's certain things that get communicated unconsciously about, oh, that's a nice way of approaching that. And I see huge similarities with the way Sir James practices and the way the Feldenkrais method itself, how we would teach a group movement class. And I can actually talk through some of those things because I think it's really helpful. One of the things is people are often in too much of a rush to get better immediately, and they don't consider what they're doing. So, for instance, and by the way, I'll mention this now in case I forget. During the pandemic, I set up a kind of a project called Flute Online, and there's links to that on my website. But every Tuesday, kind of fulfilling this need as well, I think, I started doing a class called Practice With Me, where actually everyone joins me on Zoom, everyone is muted, and I practice with everybody and then give a kind of a tutorial, but they get to hear me practice and how to approach things. But for instance, most, like if somebody, say the Tafanel and Gober EJ4, most people, if they're practicing that, they think they need to do the whole lot in one day. They kind of just play through the notes, but nothing ever gets better. It's just a series of notes that doesn't really help the music. Whereas I tell all my students, most of my students, kind of intermediate students at least, but even some of the more advanced ones, like I'll say to them, okay, EJ4, just focus on C major, sort of 1 flat, 2 flats, 3 flats, and just really get to know that, you know. But you make up all sorts of games. The other thing is, you know, people they think they need to play all of that kind of stuff exactly as it's written, and actually, I think you're really limiting what you can gain from it if you're doing it that way. Like it's much better. Like I'll do it in kind of half bars, da 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 da, or da 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 da. So you make all sorts of games out of the exercises, and that's the kind of creativity that is very, very present in the Feldenkrais method, for instance. You know, it's like you're asked to do things in a lot of kind of varieties. Going slowly in the Feldenkrais method, like we'll always ask people to move slowly. Not all lessons have slow movements in, but when you're moving slowly, you get a chance to observe what you're doing. And I describe it to people like, let's say you're having a journey and you take this journey by car. You notice certain things along the route if you're going by car. If you go and take a bicycle, you're going to notice more. If you walk, you're going to notice even more different things. And moving slowly, say practicing with the flute, doesn't necessarily mean practicing slowly, but what it does mean is going so slow enough that you really notice all the details of what you're doing, and you can kind of adapt and assess if this is necessary. You know, like let's say you're playing and you have a lot of kind of tension in your right shoulder. If you're continually just doing your scale practice, like fast the whole time, without ever giving yourself the pause to kind of think and just go, okay, what's going on here? How does my shoulder feel? What's happening with the sound? These kind of tensions build up. A big thing in the method is taking regular rests. That's a time for the nervous system to kind of take on board the learning. When I practice, I never practice more than around 20 minutes. And I set my goal is to be present, mindfully present, practicing for 20 minutes. And then when the alarm goes off, my success is doing that for 20 minutes. My success isn't measured by how much of EJ4 or EJ10 that I've done. And then, you know, if you say to yourself, for instance, I'm going to spend 10 minutes practicing EJ4, and whatever I bump into, I'm going to begin fixing and exploring. So it might be going through the scale and discovering your tone. You don't land on a nice tone on the top note. If you feel as if you need to do the whole piece, you'll kind of overlook that and nothing gets better. But if you kind of go, okay, whatever I bump into, I'm going to stop, explore, kind of improve from there. And then, you know, normally in a practice session, any of these exercises, suddenly you end up doing a very, very small amount of it, but you are guaranteeing that your flute playing is getting better. And I'm a bit skeptical about just the way people just bash through the exercises. I think the time for that is when you're very, very advanced and you want to stay in shape, which is a different thing. It's kind of almost like a maintenance rather than learning something.
But you're very much a person that when you see a note on the page, for a lot of people, that's a blob. That is just a sound that you play and then move on. You regard that blob, that little note, as having a personality. And that's what you're trying to look at, isn't it? The personality of each note.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like there's a big thing. Like, you know, I'm kind of big on the tone, sometimes a bit maybe too much, but the tone is important on the flute. I think my life's work is helping people to play with less mechanically and find out their own inherent musical creativity. I know that's what everybody wants to do, but the way I'm doing it maybe is a bit more unique in the way I employ all the stuff that I use. That people really find a way of expressing themselves through the music that's really kind of unique to each individual. So people we can get a little bit too caught up in what's on the page. We have to respect the composer. I'm going to be brave yet controversial here. We have to respect the composer. We have to kind of do what's written on the page, but we shouldn't be a slave to it, and we shouldn't be a slave to the kind of idea of the composer either. A lot of people are afraid of playing things like Bach these days because there's so many specialists have opinions on it. And I don't think that's the direction we need to be going in. I play Bach the way I like it now, and I really, really don't care what opinions people have about the way I play it. The music is too good for me to play it in a way that feels kind of inauthentic to me. It's kind of, it reminds me, William Bennett, Wib. Like Wib kind of has a saying, like I used to go and watch so many of his I've never studied with him, but I watched so many of his master classes when I was working the flute shop in Old Flutes Bus. I'd go over and he always kind of said, we all kind of know how the tune goes. Like if you get somebody to whistle, whatever, Undine Sonata or something like that, or people will whistle it very similarly. It's only when we get the flute involved that things get a little bit kind of muddled up in some ways, So like a good thing is to, get somebody to sing or whistle the tune, and that's a good, because you're using your natural musicality then, and then the flute is just a tool. It's a kind of a tool to express that.
So you guys are listening are probably aware already that Niall, and I will endorse everything that Niall says, is that the holistic approach will improve you not only as a musician, because let's face it, we can all listen to musicians playing really, really fast, but it's when you hear people play slowly or when you hear them play beautifully with a personality that the hairs on the back of the neck stands up. Now, can you do that with just practicing? I will probably go out on a limb here and say, no, you have to take a holistic approach. You have to be aware of your body. You have to be aware of that note, that blob, the personality of that blob. But more importantly, and I'm going to ask Niall to speak on this in a moment, the way you breathe will also determine the nature of the music you make. That's a big statement, isn't it? The way you breathe, because when you breathe, you're not actually playing. But the resonance of your chest cavity, and I'm going on a limb because I actually don't know nothing about what happens with the chest cavity, and Niall's going to cover that in a moment. But I know that when I learnt to breathe properly, everything changed with me.
Yep. Well, the breath is the engine to what we do, like without the breath, the flute doesn't have a voice, So if we know how to breathe, let's just use the word efficiently. I say to all my students, and this is something for everybody who's listening to, you're going to encounter, there's more than one way of playing the flute, and you're going to encounter lots of differing opinions. It's your job to kind of fight your own way through the jungle, so to speak. Try out what different teachers have to say, experiment with them. I think it's something that I wish somebody showed me earlier. Because you will hear differing opinions on various things, and students can get kind of into a lot of trouble with that. But I wanted to kind of go back about what you said, playing something slow and beautiful. And what we must need to remember is this is one of my sayings really, is a lot of people these days want to kind of play outside the box, thinking outside the box kind of thing. And my challenge to that would be, brilliant, you go do that. But in order to play outside the box, you need to know what's in the box first. And what's in the box, as far as I'm concerned with the flute, what does the flute do its best? The flute is synonymous with beauty. Like, if you get somebody to describe the sound of the flute or why were you attracted to the flute, the word beauty comes up again and again and again. And actually, there's I've kind of interests in kind of esoteric things and stuff like that. And there's a connection with the word beauty also and the sun, which is, it's too long to go into, but just it's very interesting, and the sun and the radiance of the sun. I think what we must cultivate first and foremost on the flute is the ability to convey beauty and bring beauty to the world. And then when we can do that, we can do all the other stuff, but you have to be able to do what the flute does its best, and that beauty of playing, another example, like with Sir James again, with the beauty that he plays Danny Boy with, that is, that's what we want to do. We want to be able to move an audience, and it brings a flute into, like, a lot of people want to be technical and play fast, but actually developing the ability to play the easier, it's like if you were doing an audition and you got people to play loads and loads of fast pieces, you'd get everyone to be able to do that. If you really want to test someone, give them, I don't know, something like even a slow Irish air, like She Moved Through the Fair or something like that. Just something really easy, and see how a person tackles that. And that shows so much more, and it's something that can be developed, but it comes from, there's a lot of aspects to it. It comes from kind of a connection to your innermost self and what you want to really convey in the music. It's developing a connection with the audience, and then a kind of technical aspects. It's leading me in a bit of a tangent. If you humor me, I'll go there. If you think of the four elements, so we have fire, water, air, and earth, right? We can link those four elements in a symbolic way to aspects of flute playing, right? So earth, we can really think of it as just the technical aspects of playing, right? So just being able to produce a sound, being able to play your scales, all that kind of stuff, good rhythm, good intonation, all the very mundane kind of things. Water, we can think about it, maybe your emotional intent. Fire is, we could maybe say, your will or your kind of personal kind of spark, so to speak, your intent. What do we leave out? Air is the intellect, the way we think about things. Now, we all come across players then that those four elements need to be in balance in order for the magic to happen. So we've all heard of somebody who's really emotional, but they don't have the technicalities to back it up, so it doesn't really work out. Or we can hear somebody who's really technical, but they may lack their connection to their emotions or their will, their idea of what they want to do with the piece. We can come across musicians who really overthink everything, so we can kind of hear, oh, they're thinking of the pianissimo, they're thinking of this, and it's all very thought out. And those four elements need to be brought into harmony, and considering them, and I use this model with my students a lot, in order for the fifth element, the magic, let's say, to be present. And it's only when those four things are nicely balanced that something that seems beyond ourselves become present in the music. So that's a kind of a good example of how to kind of approach that kind of stuff.
I love that. I mean, that's the first time I've heard that approach and that way of breaking down music and our ability to communicate into the elements. That is just stunning. I just want to go back a bit about the Sir James's Danny Boy, is that before I even picked up a flute, my mother, is an old English one. You know, you chop one finger off. That doesn't matter. I've got another 4. And I came downstairs. I tell this story to everybody. I came downstairs one morning and she was in tears. And she said, listen to this. And it was Sir James playing Danny Boy on the radio. And that was the reason I started, because I wanted some of that power. I wanted to make my mum cry. I mean, I made her cry, not with my flute playing, but with many other things. But the power of the communication of that flute, as you say, it's a voice. We don't have a reed. We don't have a mouthpiece. We don't have we don't hit anything or a string. It's our voice. And that's why when I've seen you work with your students, you concentrate on the whole, which is not necessarily the technical side. It is getting that communication, and that communication via Feldenkrais methods, either via breathing or it's via an NLP, by the way you're altering the way people think and focus. It is that one approach that, as you say, it's missing in many music colleges.
You need, when you're teaching, I would encourage all teachers, you really do need to believe in your students, sometimes more than they believe in themselves. And you have to have the ability to see their potential. And in the rare case that maybe you can't fully see it yet, you have to believe that it's there. And it's your job to have that come out. And the power of that alone makes you a good teacher in some ways, because we on an unconscious level can pick up on that. Like if you know, somebody's giving you a lesson and they're, you know, I'll say to you, a simple example, I'll just go, okay, now let's do this, but let's just do it much faster like this. And they look at me going, oh my God, I can't do it that way. And that exercise is for me to kind of say, yeah, I believe you can play it like that. And even if you make mistakes right now, then, okay, you've experienced it and you know your teacher believes that you'll do it. So you'll go away and practice it. We can't lose sight of the individual who's trying to bring their voice forward, you know, and any kind of glimpse of that individual's voice, we need to kind of nurture and kind of coax out.
And as you said, you're a life learner, and I'm sure you're learning from every one of your students that you see come through the door. Can we briefly speak about Embodied Musician and your audio courses, which can be found on your website?
Yeah, sure. So I have 2 audio programs that I'm really proud of. They're on my website. You can find my website. It's Niall, Niall, flute.com, or you can also find the same website through fluteonline.net. But I have a few things there. So I have my 2 embodied musician courses. So one is breath and balance, and that really looks at the intimate relationship between how our posture affects our breathing. It kind of looks at the organization of the rib cage in relation to the spine. And actually, you'd be surprised doing these it's like 3 hours of lessons, and I have kind of integrated parts where you're doing some parts of the lesson with playing the flute as well. And there's a good kind of handbook with images of the positions. The rest of it is all audio. So that's on kind of really examining the relationship between how we stand, our posture, how we relate to gravity, or how that affects our breathing. And the other one is tone, and I think it's tone and jaw comfort for flute players. And that's a real fascinating one as well, because so many flute players use an awful lot of extra effort in their jaw and they don't even realize it. Like my years giving people lessons and working with flute players, I've come to a kind of conclusion that a lot of the time when people have, like you can even do it now, if you really clench your jaw, you would feel echoes of it down your neck, even into your shoulders, right? A lot of flute players get into trouble with maybe neck pain or shoulder pain, and actually the origin of it is how they're organized in their jaw, and softening up this area can really soften up other kind of areas in ourselves. It's the lessons are basically kind of jaw lessons, lip lessons. It's not just moving of the jaw, movement of the tongue, and that all of those lessons, you know, you'll do a lesson, and I would be shocked if you did a lesson and didn't on either one of these and didn't play the flute and for the flute to sound better. So, and there's something that you can kind of go over and revisit again and again. The interesting thing with the jaw one as well is that the jaw, like a lot of the facial muscles are kind of connected into the parasympathetic part of the nervous system, particularly the vagus nerve, which can really kind of help regulate kind of feelings of stress and anxiety. So like any of the, if you think when we get stressed, one of the first things that happens is kind of going into the jaw. So there's a real relaxing benefit from that. The other work that would be useful to tell you about is at the beginning of the pandemic, I started a class. I started a whole project called Flute Online, where I haven't given a workshop in a while, but when I am, they'll be up on my website so people can check that out. I gave Feldenkrais workshops connected with flute playing, but what I did was set up this class. It's every Tuesday, 5:15 UK time, and it's a half an hour. The class is called Practice With Me. You can find the sign up on my website, and I do a kind of spontaneous class of people practicing along with me. We have a kind of a core group of people, so it's kind of grown really into a community, and I've been offering that free since the beginning of the pandemic without fail every Tuesday. And I get so many nice comments and letters from people saying the highlight of their week, and how just the regularity of having something to do every week was really helpful. And after a year of that, so many people were asking for recordings of classes that they missed. So I set up a Patreon page. So the Patreon I've divided into kind of 3 tiers. So the first tier, I call it the nickel tier, and it's £6 a month, and that's all archived recordings going quite a way back now of all the practice with me's. And everything is tagged, so if you want to kind of see what I have to say about tone or posture, you can kind of go in and do that. For £10 a month, the silver membership has all the content from the previous one, so all the practice with me's, and then also I create a special flute tutorial once a month. And then the gold tier includes all of what I've just mentioned. And the gold tier, I also include specially recorded Feldenkrais lesson for flute players. And these are all downloads, so you can download and keep them on your device. And that's included, one of them every month. I've actually added, as a kind of being a little bit more generous, I've added much more Feldenkrais lessons in that tier from previous projects that I've done, some public classes, to kind of, have the resource kind of full for people getting involved in that. So it's a good way for people to really learn with me. And, even if you go for the silver tier, it's like literally, if you attend the half an hour class, it's like less than a cup of coffee, basically. So, I've a good number of people involved in this and supporting me, and I'm really happy. Like, it helps me keep it, part of the project is the more people can support me doing this work, the more I can keep it free, and I do want to bring, have more free time to be able to maybe kind of build up my YouTube channel a little bit as well, and have more free resources for people there.
What Patreon page is it? Is it entitled Niall Flute, or is it entitled?
So it's basically patreon.com/flute online, and
Gotcha.
all the information is there. And another project to watch out for me, working with as well, is I got together, and I'm really, really excited about this. I think it's going to go in great directions. Got together with 2 of my Feldenkrais Method colleagues, Emma and Anita. Emma is a violin and viola player, and Anita is a singer, and she also plays French horn. And we decided we wanted to do, it started with a very in-depth Feldenkrais course for musicians, specifically for musicians. And we did one early on in the pandemic, and we did it for 4 years, that would be long, 4 days. It's a real immersive courses. We did 4 days. Now we're kind of sticking to 2 days, and we're even thinking just doing 1 day ones. What's really good about that is just with the Feldenkrais method, it's so broad. All of us as practitioners bring such different flavors, being musicians and Feldenkrais practitioners, to, performing. And we have instrumentalists and singers from all over the world, and also different genres. We didn't want to limit it to just classical music. And the way it works fantastically is, like, we do a lot of, you'll do some Feldenkrais, it might be a lesson on relaxing the shoulder blades, softening the shoulders. And then we do part of the lesson, we call it integrating, which is everyone stays muted, but then they get up with their instrument, and as a practitioner, we talk them through how to bring what they've learned in the lesson directly into their playing and stuff like that. You can find us on Facebook at @wellmusician. That's the handle there. But actually, you can find links to that on my website as well. When we have a course, I'll normally list it there.
Niall, this is turning into a really long podcast. And what cheeses me off, sometimes I'll speak to somebody and just not want to stop because, I thoroughly respect you as a guy, but also how you teach and the information you impart, because your only desire is to improve the well-being of an individual and their desire to convey music to an audience. So I'm sure, and I'm really, really sure on this one, that people are going to want you back in the future, because we've only just touched on so many areas that you're knowledgeable at.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Yeah, I'm Irish, so I can talk a lot as well. So that probably helps. Helps or hinders, I don't know. But yeah, there's loads, there's lots of things we didn't even kind of touch on, and things like, maybe another time we can speak about things like meditation, because I know that's an interest of yours. But they're all kind of, all tools to help the individual to reach their potential. I think that's not in music, just in life. That's our goal, is to be the best person we can be, bring the best of us to the world. And because of that, in a small way, we make the world a better place, I think.
And the beauty and joy of you is your happiness is bound up in the happiness of others, rather than the self and the ego. And, I salute you, sir, for that.
Oh, thank you so much. And
let's meet up for a coffee and a cake next time I'm in London.
Oh, it'd be brilliant. I'd love to. I'm really looking forward to trying the wooden Trevor James flute, actually.
As soon as we have one, that's going to be coming over, sir.
Yeah, it looks really great. Congratulations on it. I think it looks fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So thank you very much to Niall for coming on today and imparting such wisdom and knowledge. And also, thank you to you all for listening. Keep sending in your flute or even non-flute related questions to Claire and I at flutepodcasts@gmail.com or via our Facebook page, Talking Flutes. Please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to Talking Flutes podcast on whatever podcast channel you are listening to this. So until next week, wishing you a wonderful week ahead in whatever you've got planned or happen upon doing. May you be musically fulfilled, and may your middle C be especially resonant. Goodbye. Talking Flutes and Talking Flutes Extra are podcast productions by the Trevor James Flute Company. For more information, visit trevorjamesflutes.com.